the public lecture by Dr. Vivian Lasco. And of course, good morning for all to you at the Zoom on Zoom room. And then I think this morning we will have a discussion that still in if we, talking about the anthropology in Indonesia, I think this is one of the issues that is still less discussed. I think about the height and that, but this is now quite important to discuss about this height, embodiment, and power because we have in the country we have the national program on stunting, so it's really related. And then I think we will have a productive discussion to see how this anthropological perspective can contribute to the stunting issue. I think one of them, of course. Okay, I think this public lecture is, I think, the first from we already have the listed cluster in our department is global health, well-being, and care. And this is, I think, the first lecture, from because we just started actually. And then we have another two research cluster. One is what we call it, ruang hidup and
space, yeah.
And living space and
Socio-political transformation.
socio-political transformation. And then the second is
Traditions and indigeneity.
tradition and indigeneity. That's we have the three research cluster. Okay, I think, and then today we have a discussion is Dr. Sali Damaratri. So I think we can start now. So we have more time to have a Q&A session later. Yeah. Okay, please. You want to speak?
Atau ke
Yeah.
ini ke Sari dulu.
Kenapa?
Thank you, Mas Irwan.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a real joy for me to really be here. I see so many parallels between Philippines and Indonesia. So being here makes me feel at home in a way that I don't feel when I'm in Europe or the US. So there's something very special about being here, very resonant.
At least you are not feel short.
Yes. But this whole presentation is premised on the fact that, and by the way, thank you for coming, for those of you. I know it's the middle of the year and would rather be, like personally, I really also am not in the university all the time, especially in this time of the year. So thank you for being here. The premise that I start with is the fact that we are vertical beings. We humans occupy vertical space. You probably know, whether it's in inches or centimeters, you probably know what your height is. It's one of the attributes that we have that we know we have, and we know if you're asked what's your height, maybe I'm sure you have an answer. And that answer is relatively inflexible. Weight can be, if you ask what's your weight, maybe that can change based on what you eat, and you can try to change your weight quite dramatically. Some people can change their weight that much, but height is relatively stable. So it's a part of our identity. And it gets even more interesting when we relate that fixed attribute with other people. So this behind me is the illustration I commissioned for the cover of my dissertation, just to show how, just like criminals who are made to stand before a height chart or behind them, we can also be measured. We are measurable. But the act of measuring is also an act of power. The very first attempts to measure height were in relation to either the soldiers who undergo the military, for example, they get measured, they get classified, they get organized. And the colonial regimes around the world also did a lot of anthropometric measurements. So to measure someone it's an exercise of power, whether through biopolitics or through direct employment. You want to apply to this company, then you have to undergo these examinations, and we will measure all kinds of things. But what gets measured is also a matter of choice. Why height and not head circumference, for example. In the past, people were measuring head circumference. So what I did in my dissertation, in my PhD, is to study height. I did an ethnography of height. I decided to look at tallness and shortness as ethnographic objects and just lived in a place for a whole year. It's a beautiful place, by the way, Palawan. It's one of our beautiful islands. I lived there for more than a year just to follow young people and see how height matters in their everyday life. Do they care about height? But this is something that you cannot just ask people directly. And this is the beauty of anthropology, is we don't take people's responses at face value. We want to observe. We want to understand in a very intimate way. So it's not enough to ask people, what do you feel about your height? But we have to experience it. We have to live. This is embodiment of height itself. So if we look more broadly, actually, height is all over it. If you can search online about where height matters, if you apply this ethnographic gaze towards height, then everything gets interesting. Pop culture, one of the most searched, if you just put any random celebrity in Google search, one of the most commonly searched, because there's an auto predictive text, right? That like Taylor Swift, and then age and the height emerges as one of the more common things. And even world leaders. So if you search Jokowi, one of the first most commonly searched height, Xi Jinping, and so on. And there are articles like this even comparing the boyfriends of Taylor Swift in terms of height. And Taylor Swift herself is quite tall.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in itself, because when we think about height, then we think about gender as well, the relationality of height and the height expectations depending on gender. Donald Trump famously diminished his opponents in a very physical way. So it's not the saying that you're, it's not just belittling them in a metaphorical sense, but actually calling them little Marco Rubio or small, etc. And he was very much offended when people were saying, no, you're not really 6'4". You're not as tall as you claim to be. And you're wearing shoes. You're wearing platform shoes. Vladimir Putin as well has been, so there is fascination. People are fascinated about height. I think we can all agree with that there's curiosity, there's fascination towards the height of people at the individual level. And I think this is an April Fool's joke, but this is just a meme to make fun of the fact that people exaggerate their height. People claim to be 6 feet or 5'8", but they're not actually not that tall. But there's a desire to be taller than they actually are. And of course, we can perform tallness by wearing shoes or depending on the posture as well. So there's many performativities around height. So height is fairly stable, but there have been efforts to actually make people become taller. Very controversial in the past when it became known globally that in China they're practicing leg lengthening surgery. So you would literally fracture your own self, medically fracture your bones just to make it taller. This is a very expensive and painful procedure. But people want to be tall, and some people want to be taller enough to do this very expensive procedure. And today it's gotten even more popular. So you can search online and find people who are doing this procedure across the world. It's becoming more and more popular. Started in China using a Russian technology, I think the Illusory technique in orthopedics, but now globally. But because of our one size fits all capitalist economy in which people produce like Uniqlo, you can produce clothes for small, medium, large. But there's also the question of tallness being accommodated through clothing. And there are actual websites that are accommodating people who are taller and shorter, given that everything now comes in preset sizes. So the idea that we come as human beings, as physical objects, as we have sizes, we have height, is something that's anthropologically very interesting to me. And we can relate this all the way back to the classic times in which the human form and shape was theorized and philosophized by people from Da Vinci onwards. The idea that we have proportion, we have symmetry, we can also relate height in terms of human evolution, in terms of how what makes us humans and what sets us apart from other animals is our erect posture and therefore the vertical axis in which we inhabit. When we can, in theory, I can walk on four limbs in front of you. I'm not gonna do that, but it's possible for me to do that. But we walk by the bipedal stand is what we do, and that's very unique to humans. And even in evolutionary theory, it's hypothesized that it has value and so on. But the upright posture has been there, associated with humanity. Uh, and we can look at religion as well in terms of how in the Bible, the trope of David and Goliath rested on. So on one hand, it shows that someone short like David can defeat a giant like Goliath, but it somehow acknowledges the power of tallness, the power of bigness, and it's something to be overcome. Even in epics, the Mahabharata, and so on, gods and heroes are often depicted as taller than human beings. Greek mythology as well. If you look at Iliad and Odyssey, you can see how heroes are depicted as tall. Megaphos in Greek, Megalos, Megaphos. So there's a lot of portrayal that tallness is better across antiquity. On the other hand, dwarves are also seen as fascinating, but more for curiosity, more for amusement. And in Europe, we can see how for centuries and even millennia, dating back to the Roman Empire, emperors and kings alike saw taller soldiers as status symbols. So there's this famous William the First of Prussia who tried to look for six-footers across Europe and just got them all to be his personal guard. And that's a status symbol for him that, look, my soldiers are tall. So humanity, and if you're a tall soldier, if you're a tall person at that time, it had value as someone who can be recruited as a soldier, as compared to someone who's not tall. In the same way that today, as a significant proportion of people who are 7 feet and taller are in the NBA. So it's a rare phenomenon for people to be taller than 7 feet, that they're mostly basketball players. And that has significant economic implications. If you're taller, then you can get into the certain roles. So height can literally determine your economic life. And so there's this comparative fascination about comparing humanity in terms of stature. But height is not fixed in terms of individuals because we grow. We start off as babies. So there was once upon a time we were very small, and then people grow. But populations also grow, and it's very intriguing that over the past century we've seen countries become taller. So the average Dutchman is 6 feet tall. But in the past, it wasn't that way. In the past, Europeans were also much shorter than they are now. So in my dissertation, I not only did an ethnography, which I'm going to present in a short bit, but I also tried to do some kind of historical analysis to look at how height figured in the colonial encounter, how height became an object of colonial power as well, and how the Americans related their own bodies with Filipinos at the time. And that made me realize how very much relational height is. There's no such thing as short and tall. These are comparative terms. These are adjectives that rely on a standard. And in the American colonial period in the Philippines, the Americans used their bodies as the normative frame against which the colonized was measured. Uh, This happened also before in the Spanish colonial period, which was much longer in the Philippines, 3 centuries, 16th to 19th century. But the comparative approach was much more in the American period. And I also applied the same gaze in the field of anthropometry because people only started measuring children in the late 19th century. So there was an attention to measuring child growth in the late 19th century. And so they started coming up with these growth charts. The idea that children grow a certain way and they did averages. So they started defining people in terms of whether they're average or 10th percentile or 90th percentile and so on. So babies, human beings, started to be plotted in these tables. But there was resentment as well, at least in the Philippines, that, oh, why are we measuring our babies according to this American growth charts, Harvard growth charts, and Iowa growth charts? So I also devoted some time to historicize the development of growth charts in the Philippines. But what really led me to this topic is this existence of this supplement in the Philippines. So I was involved in the chemical use project with Anita Hardon, who's my supervisor, and also Diana, supervisor. And she was doing a study of chemicals, what young people use in their everyday lives, from cigarettes to soap to cosmetics to lotion and so on. And we did what we call head to toe surveys that's asking people, what do you put to your bodies? What do you apply? What do you consume? Supplements, vitamins, and so on. So I ended up eliciting the preponderance of illicit drugs, shabu. Some of the young people I interviewed were consuming shabu. But we also saw how it was also very popular among young people to take this cherry fur. This is a supplement that's very, very popular in the Philippines until today. And it's marketed that it will make you grow taller. Pampatangkad. So tangkad means tall in the Philippines. And this supplement is marketed as to make children grow taller. And you can see in the actual product label, height is might. You can see height is might in the basketball ring, around the basketball ring. And there's an image of a young man playing basketball. So the association with basketball being the most popular sport in the Philippines. And apparently, this is the most popular supplement in the whole country. It was selling so well that it's one of the most highest selling supplements and pharmaceuticals in the whole country, even though it's quite expensive. So people are willing to invest. So that made me curious. That made me wonder why. Why are people investing so much for height? Interestingly, this product is called cherry fur. So the fur refers to ferrous. So iron. This is an iron supplement. It started off as an iron supplement, but the company realized that there's a marketing opportunity to sell it as a growth supplement. But it started off as an iron supplement. So what did I end up doing in this ethnography that I was allowed to do? So from doing this grand survey of all the pharmaceuticals, all the supplements, I was given the opportunity to explore my own research interest. So I decided to do an ethnography of height. So I ended up hanging out with young people. I also ended up serving as a participant observer in a nutrition clinic. So I was serving I volunteered as a doctor in a barangay, in a village, where they were doing anthropometrics. So I was just observing the mothers, the nurses, the health workers, how they measure height and what people's concerns were. I also observed this ritual in the Philippines during New Year's Eve that children would jump during midnight because they believe that if you jump at midnight, then you will become tall. The midnight of the New Year's Eve. So I also observed that. Uh, I was just really observing how height was being used all over the place, including by nutrition NGOs as a way to advertise the need for we need to be tall. But then it begs the question that aren't you verifying the importance of tallness through these advertisements? as well. Like in arguing that, oh, we need children to be taller because to be tall is so important. But aren't you also reinforcing the importance of tallness through these practices? That made me ask those questions as well. So beyond the individual and the community, height can also take on geopolitical significance, as when this was just posted on Facebook while I was doing my fieldwork back in 2014, 2016. But it went viral in the Philippines because it showed Philippines being one of the shortest in Southeast Asia.
Really?
And when this was posted on Facebook, the president of the Philippines was saying to the cabinet members that, what are we doing? We need to work on this. So it became geopolitical, it became political, and the head of the nutrition agency was being asked by the cabinet members, what can we do? This is so problematic. But that happens when you constitute as an entire population as 162 centimeters. It doesn't exist. I am not 162 centimeters, but there's an imaginary measure of a nation. So, interestingly, when we think of the body politic, it also takes on a very physical form through these practices of statistics, of anthropometrics, of making averages out of entire nations, even when they mask inequality. So in this chart, it says Indonesia 158 centimeters, but I doubt if this is true for Jakarta. Maybe this is true for the average of Indonesia at a certain moment in time. But it is not true in an absolute sense. It's not a positive truth as well. And it masks inequality. So in my experience while doing this field work, I was also asked, is this true? Are Filipinos short? Well, it depends where you are. It depends on the individual. It depends on the community. In the private schools of Manila, where very rich families send their kids, the children are very tall. Children are very, very tall. But if you go to these public schools in Palawan, where the nutrition is much more difficult, then you have short kids. So it depends where you are. But these averages mask those complexities and inequalities. So flag ceremonies, I was observing schools, and I saw how during flag ceremonies, children are arranged according to height.
Yeah.
So early on, people learn their place based on how tall they are, how short they are. So and even I remember being in these being in these lines in the flag ceremony and remembering where I was in the line. So people are socialized to view their height as part of their identity in relation to other people. This is just an illustration of bullying in a school textbook. But as you can see, the illustrator decided to illustrate the person being bullied as shorter than the bullies. So again, these practices, I feel, reinforce the idea that tallness is power and shortness is placing people in subordinate positions. So what did I do in this ethnography aside from attending nutrition clinics, aside from watching schools? I decided to make a comic strip as an ethnographic tool so that I can learn from young children and from school children in terms of what they think about height. So I decided to make this story, illustrated story of someone named Francis who wanted to be tall. And then he ended up becoming tall, but he felt not too happy. Like I made a story about tallness, but I asked the children what do they feel about the story. So that's how I try to access them. Because it's so hard if you ask them directly, what do you feel about height? But if there's a story, then it's easier ethnographically to talk about it. So I designed this comic strip together with the local artist. So this is the Philippine this is a textbook of Philippine culture. And as you can see, people are also portrayed according to taller. People are getting taller, but based on greater civilization, it's very weird, very problematic. But there's this idea that the original people in the Philippines were shorter And the Philippines is populated by people who are increasingly taller, ending with the Europeans and the Americans. So very problematic, very weird, but perpetuated in textbooks and illustrations like this. So again, the very, very basic premise of what all of the things that I've been doing is just to take height seriously as a physical attribute.
Yeah.
So when I look at this page in a textbook, okay, these are human beings. How do they align vertically? This is another illustration of the supposed peoples who migrated to the Philippines, uh, including the so-called Indonesians. This is not really the Indonesians, meaning you, but there's a category of so-called migrants in the Philippines called Indonesians. Based on an imaginary. It's been refuted long ago, but it's still reinforced in textbooks that apparently Philippines started with the Negritos and then the Malays and then the Indonesians. Very weird theory.
Long way to go, friend.
Yeah. So you're my ancestors in this weird framework. Now, if we take height seriously, we end up taking even the height of the built environment seriously. So when we say tall people have an advantage in basketball, then we also have to take the very basketball seriously in terms of its physicality. And the basketball ring is 10 feet. Someone made it 10 feet. Humans designed to make the basketball ring 10 feet. So again, I feel that the moment we take all of these things seriously, then we ask questions about the built environment as well. So when we look at aircraft, it's some people struggle to reach the luggage compartment in the aircraft. But why? Humans are the passengers of aircraft, but which kind of humans were normative? How are machines, are buildings designed? For what kind of human bodies is the world designed? So in the Philippines, some farmers complain that the tractors they're having trouble. They have pain in their hands because the tractors are so big. The machinery.
Yeah.
But this machinery are second-hand machinery from Europe that ends up in the Philippines. So even in these very mundane things, such as work, labor, we see how height differences are reflected and how power is exercised in terms of what kinds of normative bodies are used as blueprints for our built environment. And the sports, of course, favors people who are taller. But even basketball has a history. Basketball was invented in the late 19th century alongside different sports. It's part of the muscular Christianity in the US. And it favors taller bodies, of course. And in my field site, I saw how these young students in Palawan, they wanted to be good in basketball, not just so that they will become popular in their class, but being a good basketball player can give you access to athletic scholarships in Manila. So it has immense value for them. Their lives depend on basketball. Because if they get a scholarship in Manila, then they're guaranteed a better job. But if they stay in Palawan, there are limited job opportunities. But they can't afford the private schools in Manila. The only way, in their mind, and I think in reality, the only way they can get to Manila is through athletic scholarships. But the people in Manila know this because they have basketball teams and they want to do well in basketball as well. It's universities in the Philippines. So they send scouts just to see which players can be recruited and they would give them scholarships. So there are people watching in this game who might actually hire or give them scholarships. And that's one of their audiences when they're playing these games. But here's the catch. These scouts, these teams in Manila will only consider you to play for them if you're 6 feet and taller. If not, then you have no, you can be the best basketball player in Palawan. But if you're shorter than 6 feet, then they will not get you. And I interviewed coaches, like, why is that? They said, well, we can teach people how to play basketball, but we cannot teach them height. We cannot teach them to be taller. But we can train a 6-footer to be good in basketball. So we need tall players. So height, I saw, has a lot at stake in it, especially for people with limited economic opportunities. And this is reinforced by these very tall billboards that actually reinforce the value of tallness. If you see these billboards in Manila advertising how height is might, so there's a kind of positive feedback going on with these products. They're not just selling things that make you grow taller. It doesn't actually work. There's no evidence that it works, but people buy it anyway. But it's also advertising the idea of tallness itself. It's marketing tallness itself. So this is a margarine. It's a margarine brand, and it means mas abot mo ang pangarap. You can reach your dreams. So again, the very literal, you can reach your dreams if you eat this margarine. So aside from basketball, another thing that's very important for young people are beauty pageants. Maybe that's something that's different between Indonesia and Philippines. Is that the Philippines the people are so obsessed with beauty pageants, and everything has a beauty pageant, including hospitals.
Yeah.
And government offices. They have own beauty pageants, and it starts early on. So these beauty pageants are not just for fun, again, but for these young people, they think that if they're attractive, they might find someone who will employ them, will give them opportunities. So the body becomes a form of capital in itself. That if you're attractive, then you have opportunities for jobs, for education, and so on. You become more attractive. Kapansin-pansin in the Philippines, meaning attractive, noticeable. So people really want that. So I ended up concluding in my dissertation how just like peer produced forms of capital, the body also serves as a form of capital that can be converted to symbolic capital and social capital and body and even economic capital as well. If you can get jobs and education opportunities thanks to these events. In the words of one of my interlocutors, my life would have been very different if I were a few inches shorter. So for her, just having this few inches of difference in her own body made a difference in her own life. But you can see also in these beauty pageants that they wear high heels as well. So height is not just sought after, but it's also performed through practices, through products like very high heels. And these people struggle to walk in them, as you can imagine. I wouldn't walk from Margo Hotel to here with those heels. I don't think anyone would. But people do this. People wear these heels. It's very painful, but they're willing to do this because they want to look taller, because they feel that that's really an advantage for them. So if you go to malls in the Philippines, you can also see these shoes that will make you actually taller, including for men. So this is one of the shoes that I bought in my defense in the Netherlands, so I can be average large. But you can buy them. You can buy them in Manila. So there's a desire, there's a demand for these products, because there's people who want to look taller. And you can even choose 3 inches taller, 4 inches taller, 3.5 inches taller. So people really want to be tall. But why wouldn't you? This is a door to a security agency in Palawan, my field site. And as you can see, the qualification is you must be 5'7" to become a security guard. And at least, so it's very funny. The height is very clear. Male, 5'7", female, 5'3", and then very small, at least college level. Yeah, it's not that important. The important thing is you're tall. And when I interview these agencies, they said, well, of course, if you have a security guard, why will you hire a security guard who's short? No one, the criminals will not be afraid. So there is this acknowledgement of the importance of the physical in these contexts. But as you can see, a female is also possible to be a security guard, but can be shorter. There's different expectations of height depending on gender. Depending on gender. So flight attendants as well, so Cebu Pacific. So if you want to visit the Philippines, and I invite you, Cebu Pacific is very cheap flights to Manila. I took a Cebu Pacific flight from the Philippines from Manila to Jakarta. So again, these flight attendants, there's height requirements as well. But why 5'7" for males and why 5'3" for females? If the rationale is that you need to reach the overhead compartment on the plane, then why the difference in gender? It's really fascinating to me. But again, I interviewed the people who are in charge of recruitment for airlines, and they said, well, we want attractive women and men because the passengers will feel better. They won't be too they won't complain too much if there's someone in front of them who's pretty and smiling. So we need attractive people. So there's really a desire for what's euphemistically called pleasing personality. So there's a term in the Philippines, and you can see it in job advertisements. Wanted, whatever, must be 18 to 30 years old, must have pleasing personality. So this phrase, this term pleasing personality is a code word for attractiveness. However, they define it, but usually define in terms of height as well. And this is an example. You can go to Japan if you want to work, but you have to be male, 20 to 28 years old, and 5'4". Must be, and you also notice how height really is up there in terms of the requirements. Just like this one, that height is the main requirement in these qualifications as well. Height, 5'4", no body operation, no tattoo, must have good vision, must be Filipino, but at the top is height, must be 5'4". Even to be a laundry washer, you must be female, single, or married, doesn't matter, 20 to 30 years old, at least 5 foot. You have to be 5 feet to be a laundry washer in Japan. So when I interview these employment agents, they say, well, they have to reach the washing machine. They have to reach the they have to reach the equipment. So they cannot be too short. So but it's very interesting how even in today's time we have these height requirements. Now going back a bit of history, we can see that the exercise of power of height is also exercised in the colonial lens. And Americans deliberately juxtaposed their height against the Filipinos to project a sense of superiority and to legitimize their power. But obviously, they chose the shortest Filipino they could find and the tallest. This is not, this is contrived. This is made up juxtaposition. This is not something that you will see. But the Americans knew what they were doing. They were performing difference. So bodily difference as a way to legitimize inequality. So from difference to inequality, there's a jump there. But even as early as the American period, and I'm referring to the early 20th century, we can see that the Americans institutionalized the value of height. So this is the Manual of Civil Service for Filipinos in 1906 that was written by the Americans. And as you can see, if you're 5'8", you can earn 3 times more than someone who's 5'4". With the same position, patrolman, fireman, the taller you are, the higher you earn. And this is part of the law, this is part of the guidelines, this is part of the government manual at that time. So they really institutionalized the value of tallness. So if you're a fireman, you can only be a first-class fireman if you're 5'4". If you're 5'2", you're just second-class fireman. Very interesting. And I'm really curious to hear whether there's some kind of analogy or analogous example in Indonesia. So, however, again, as part of this performance of height, the reification of height and populations, this is a photograph of Hollywood in the 1930s. And they were looking for natives to play as extras in the film. But to be a native, you have to be lower than 5 feet. So they were setting a requirement that you can only be native if you're short. So they are verifying it. It's a reification. It's made up. They want to portray natives as short, and they also say that natives are short. So it's a circular thing that happened during the American period. So Filipinos were literally cast as short people in this film. So I've written some of these articles to describe them. We can also think of philosophy and how we orient our emotions in the vertical. We orient religion vertically as well. We orient gods in the vertical axis. So is that part of the explanation why tallness enjoys this literal superiority? I don't know. But it is something to think about. Something to think about how the vertical axis really pervades even our thoughts. That we orient things vertically. That I'm feeling down. I want to experience loftiness. So there's an idea of emotions reaching a literal high, the verticality of emotions, which is inscribed in religion. And even in the urban spaces now, we see how buildings are becoming taller and taller. So the verticality of our cities has become more of a space that people inhabit. Elevators, people now also travel vertically. And that's something that did not exist before. So I wonder whether the verticality of spaces has to do with the emergence of tallness as value in modernity. Because why do you need to be tall in the practical sense of the word? If you were a farmer in the 9th century, what was the value of tallness during that time? But now that we have buildings, we have vertical spaces, then tallness has more value in cities, arguably. This is just looking at the vertical more broadly beyond humanity. They include cities and so on. Apparently, in Brazil, the space is becoming more and more limited, that even graveyards are being stacked vertically. So there's a vertical cemetery in Brazil. If you're interested in this. So even the built environment is being designed based on a normative verticality. So even the placement of urinals in the male toilet, even the gym equipment, even our chairs depend on a normative human being. So it's interesting to think of the built environment in terms of height as well, and the aircraft. So when Westerners go to the Philippines, they complain that the Philippines was not built for tall people. And maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. But also the world is built for people. The world around us, we built the world based on our bodies as well. So that's something to think about. But also the idea of the trope of the tall girl and the short man is something that I also was interested in my ethnography. So I interviewed the tallest girls I could find in Palawan and also the shortest boys just to interview them about their experiences. So the tall girls felt bad. They said, "Oh, I'm too tall here. No one wants to date me. I have to go elsewhere because the boys are so short." So there's also this idea of how gendered the expectations are in terms of height. And conversely, the boys also feel that there's an expectation in terms of tallness. But I also interviewed the tallest boys that I could find. And some of them felt bad because they were being expected to play basketball. Someone said, "Oh, but I want to play chess. Chess is my passion." But people said, "Oh, your height is sayang." And sayang means it's a waste. It's a waste for height because you're tall, but you're not playing basketball. You're sayang. But they feel bad about it. They feel that they're expected to be very, very aggressive, very masculine, just because they're taller. There's also the association of height with families as well, which is very, very interesting that certain families have expectations of tallness and belonging based on their height as well. So we can see it reflected in sports, but there's power in subversion that, oh, he's short, but he's able to do this. There's power of subversion. And if we go and embrace more than human ethnography, then we can think of height as well in terms of how we relate not just to fellow human beings, but to other species. So our own verticality as aligned and as compared to other species, very interesting how we tend to respect species that are big or tall like us or big like us, as one anthropologist put it. So, for the orangutan commands a lot of respect and probably will be protected by wildlife agencies because they're big. So, this charismatic species also rely on a certain size and a certain relationality with human beings in terms of their size. So, we respect animals that are bigger than us. So, I will end by raising this provocative movement all over the world of shrinking. They're arguing that because of our size, we're consuming so much of our resources in this planet, and we should try to become shorter. And this is in stark contrast to the global health ethos that, oh, stunting is problematic, we need to become taller. But some people are suggesting we should actually try to shrink ourselves so that we consume less of the planet. And their proposal is that we shrink to the size of a ayam so that we can become more sustainable. They say that if we're all 50 centimeters, then we can live longer in this planet and our species will survive longer. But it also raises the question of height and of species. Some species are, with the island effect, some species are shorter because and smaller because there's less resources in the island. So do we, if the planet has lesser resources, then do we also do this? Philosophically thinking. I mean, it's very, very absurd and very provocative, but also something to think about in terms of, again, our spatiality. So that's it. I raised so many provocative things and we can talk about it. This is the book that came out of that dissertation. And again, I really hope to hear from the Indonesian perspective. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gideon. I think just to Sari,
Is it there?
you want to?
Yeah. Where? Oh, maybe I don't know.
No,
Okay, I can go there.
Okay, yeah. You want to do that? Ah, okay.
Oh, yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. Yeah, the table design was a bit weird. All right, Gideon. I think I agree with you a lot of your work. That like listening your lecture as well as reading one of your work, the Little Brown Brothers. It makes me thinking about so many things, including one is that how you and I coming from native anthropology, so to speak, but local anthropologists doing field work in their own place. And while you think about height when you were in the Netherlands, I was actually didn't realize about my height to or attention to height that's so all encompassing until I become a mother actually. So in my dissertation, I was only focused on the impacts of stunting, which you also explain in your work as this kind of measurements or the impact of low malnutrition, low nutrition to the body, and it's become short than how the WHO think you should be. But at this point, I didn't pay attention to the height and weight as much before until my own son becoming part of this kind of object in this kind of state project to produce a better generation, a better Indonesian human beings, and this kind of human capital ideas that sort of circling around the implementation of stunting priority program, stunting as a development priority program in Indonesia, was suddenly become national political object as well. So first, I think like it wasn't until 2012, I guess, the term stunting itself become sort of popular discourses. But now I think many of us, we encounter, we hear about stunting in almost everyday situation, whether we understand what is the definition of stunting, but it's just everywhere. You can see in the billboard of like a very busy road in Bandung, like stop stunting or stop stunting is important, this kind of thing. But so what happened in the Philippines, as you were talking and about your work, is actually happening right now as a contemporary situations in Indonesia. I think we weren't think about height as much until recently. So I think that's what makes it interesting because I don't know, is it like the Philippines already, exposed to this kind of colonial idea about being high is better, being high is then allowing you to certain opportunities and become the, civilizing native project. But now it is part of the current history that Indonesia is currently experiencing. That's, I think, one of the things that I feel like a lot of our works are intersect in that area as well. And also the engagement to the history, I think like you build on grammar, so to speak, like that see in the Philippines identity is actually a product of encounter. But you say that it's corporeal encounters, right? Meaning is that, if I'm not mistaken, is that it's through the body that we experiencing these comparative paradigms about being being tall is better, and then lower as negative. That this kind of dichotomy between height and short, it's become prevalent, and as we compare ourselves with others. And I think it is now it makes me thinking about, I want to know more if Indonesian mothers, as I am, who was exposed to this idea of stunting, is risking our sons' future life because they're being short if they are not treated better, or not. Or I'm actually wondering if many of Indonesian women also reject this kind of ideas about, oh no, even though my son is short, I love him anyway, and I don't care with what the state try to told us. So I think in the inward looking sort of, I just want to know if like, yeah, at least this is inspiring me to think about that kind of, how far this kind of reflective thinking about what the state projecting in the stunting project is actually believed by the mothers, or not. And another thing that I found it also interesting is that in terms of height, you also bring the idea that height as a colonial discourse through public health, through the establishment of public health as a discipline, where basically there is this existence of colonial logic to civilize the native, and this promise of different world, different life, through correcting the native bodies that previously short. Now with the expansion of nutrition technology, food, and social medicines, eventually the native will be better because of that. And that's give the idea of the legitimacy of American civilizations and also Filipinos' claim of autonomy and independence. And I think that's also similar. I found it during the 1950s in Indonesia, where there is a Sukarno, which is the first president of Indonesia, Sukarno's pediatricians, who first actually brought this idea that women in Indonesia should pay attention to children's development and growth, because by investing through the mothers, we will eventually have a better nations. This kind of human capital that I was talking earlier actually have a long, deep historical roots even in the beginning of our post-colonial era. And now in the current stunting project that I observe, the roles of pediatricians and nutritionists are very prevalent in the social media. For example, my dissertation take a look at this role of nutritionist, very well known, and she was graduated from this university as well, and her followers like a lot. Basically, she's an influencer in social media and brought this idea about nutrition to the mothers. So the audience is obviously the mothers, but nutrition was never as periphery, but also not as prevalent as today. I think that's what I'm saying in the current expert regime that guides Indonesian development program as of today. And the pediatricians also become sort of this authoritative actors that defines whether intervention through children's are should through them to judge. So there's kind of ideas that we take a look at the applications to measure children's weight and growth in our recent project with Diana, actually. But one of the applications owned by a very well-known pediatricians who developed these applications to help mothers to measure growth and height. But there are certain informations that usually you cannot say, like for example, the application do not measure the mother's weight and height previously and only focus on the baby itself. So it means like the pediatrician through these apps really like imposing or giving more sort of like this kind of belief that mother should sacrifice as much to maintain baby's weight and height following the WHO standards. But I'm wondering now whether this idea of challenging or rethinking WHO standards to Indonesian bodies right now is like how people think about weight and height. I think that I still really interesting to see, like learning from your work that you interview, even like beauty pageant in the everyday life of this basketball young people. I didn't at least we need more research to think about that one, because there are so many layers that is intersect, but also we haven't opened up this kind of looking at our body as in the corporeal sense as importance, especially because we are now in a sort of human capital regime of development. And another thing that we haven't really, I think I haven't think it thoroughly, and maybe I didn't get a chance also from my observation to see that, how people actually challenge or think about stunting as a way to think about racial logics, like how tallness is rendered to economic consequences is so prevalent in the design of the stunting program in Indonesia. But yeah, we haven't really think about it, how people think about that, because there's only one encounters in NTT. There was one government worker was saying like in 2019, oh, something is actually not a problem in Indonesia because our ancestor is Homo florensis, which is typically short compared to other Homo sapiens that found in the Indonesia, modern Indonesia. So I feel like, but after 2020, 2023 until now, this kind of rational thinking changed, sort of not anymore looking at that we were actually shorter, but now it's something that can be changed, which is also you show it in your work, can be changed by, for instance, associating with Korea successful to change their average body weight, body height, and they believe that by taking advantage of this first 1,000 life of births, 1,000 hari pertama kehidupan, we can actually change our body and then become, good future labor, and then you won't have any, non-communicable disease in the future, this kind of thing. So, yeah, I think I want to take these opportunities to sort of like engage with something that I haven't think about it, and also invite more of my colleagues here to think about our own, experience as a researcher and also as part of the citizens of the project, the state project as well. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Maybe Gideon, do your last one first, and then after that we open to the floor here.
Thank you, Sari, for engaging with the work and really sharing. I mean, I'm so provoked and so excited about even the mention of Homo florensis, for example, and how a long ago fossil is being invoked and cited as grounds for policy, but also how this is changing as well to Korea, how and what you just shared to me makes me think about how, yes, the colonial logic is so important to historicize, but also to look at our contemporary picture of how the US is no longer the standard, and people are comparing themselves to K-pop stars and to other Asian nations in terms of their own bodies. So the standards are changing, and that we are also anthropologists. How can we study this phenomenon in terms of not just going to people, but also looking at states, looking at government agencies? I think you mentioned the provision agency as well, and also how there's so much resonance with how Sukarno's pediatricians were, as you said, concerned about children and how the body and the nation are actually conflated into one, and how they need to be nourished, and how that's a part of growth as well of the nation itself. So that's one area that we should look at. But I'm still surprised at how, in a way, the trajectory is very different between the Philippines and Indonesia in terms of the importance of height. Given how, as you said, this is a relatively recent concern in Indonesia, whereas in the Philippines, as I have seen, is really been there for so long. The preoccupation towards height. Even the word pandak in the Philippines has pejorative connotations. So there's really a lot of sensitivity about height. To a point that if someone is short, the euphemistic way to describe it is di katangkaran or not too tall. because you don't want to say someone or you're short. That's insulting. So I think comparative work should be a good direction moving forward, given how we can see how things interact. I think Singapore as well would be an interesting country to look at in terms of the region, Malaysia, how there's a comparison that, oh, we're in the same region, but how come certain countries are taller than us? So the politics itself should be looked at, and the human capital component. So really thank you for engaging, and hopefully we can work together and think together about time.
Okay. Okay. I think there's we take the first three questions and then Imam.
Yeah.
Imam, Fikri, and then any other? Okay, we start with two questions first. Yeah.
Yeah,
Imam. Yeah.
Thanks, Mas Irwan, and thanks, Gideon. This is really fascinating uh, a lecture, and I just curious about trying to compare about our own experience. I don't have any research on this, any knowledge about research on this subject in Indonesia apart from Sari dissertations. But in Indonesia, sometimes people also not just being categorized in accordance with the height, but also with the weight. But sometimes we measure the weight as well. You are taller and you have a little big body, and then you call bongsor. Bongsor is associated with people usually not quite smart, and is usually being bullied as well. And whether we can use this not just the x-axis, the vertical axis, but also the single axis, whether in Philippines that is also becoming a concern, because as far as I know in Indonesia, if you're smaller and you are quite big, they call it your bullet or some kind of like a ball or something. So it's also associated with something morally and politically problematic as well. But just curious whether in the Philippines that's also a concern.
And then I think
Fikri, yeah. Thank you for the lecture. I was curious if there are any resistance from those who are impacted with the high expectation, those who are particularly challenged, those who are either outside or even shorter than the expected. You actually mentioned briefly about those people, the tall girl and the short boy. Those are also the intersecting identity where the height also correlates with the gender, and therefore the tall girl and the short boy, short man is it's part of the intersecting identity where when one identity actually benefits from the society and the other while the others doesn't. You mentioned guilt and have an unrealistic experience, but I would like to I'm interested on their experience and how actually they navigate their life when access to economy, access to job, even access to public services may be limited for those with people who particularly challenged. I would like to know about that. Thank you.
okay.
Thank you, Imam and Fikri. Yes, what Imam mentioned about also the horizontal, the other dimension is also there in the Philippines. We have a concept of lampa, for example. Lampa being someone who's tall, but is very thin and very frail. So that's also subject to societal sanction if you're not living up to this idea of tallness, being tall and strong and fit. And also among the people who are short, we have also a term called bonchog, which means someone who's short and very big, very rounded, and also not. So there are certain bodily categories that don't conform, and they're also not accepted or not as desired as compared to this idea of tallness. So it's not just height that's there. There are other variables. But height somehow is the predominant thing, which is what, and I end up focusing on it. So that's my main concern. But at the same time, yes, there are also horizontal dimensions to bodily, to the corporeality that people are concerned about. Maybe one thing that I can use to argue for a particular focus on height is the fact that unlike weight, which can be seen as something that can be worked upon, height has this kind of stability or immutability that people's heights are more or less final unless you do this leg lengthening surgery or something dramatic, in which case you can change your height. But yes, there's more diversity in terms of the nutrition, especially about children as well. There's a lot of assessment about babies. Even as young as 1 year, you'll be surprised as young as 1 year old. Some babies parents are applying skin whitening. They want a cuter baby to be this, oh, how fair skin, how white. And they're even doing that to children as young as 1 year old. So there's a lot of concern about the body itself. And height is just one subset of that. Yeah. And then in terms of what Fikri mentioned about the resistance, that's really important to highlight how even in the colonial period, people protested discrimination, of course. But height was seen as natural. But the body, being the body, is somehow seen as a natural category of difference, that it escaped even the attention of people who would normally protest. Like why are you discriminating about gender? Why are you discriminating about race? That's problematic. But somehow the body has escaped critique, given that it's seen as natural. That, yeah, it's natural for us to require people who are taller because they need to reach the plane, they need to reach the ceiling, they need to reach the compartment. So there's a kind of naturalization that's ascribed to the human body to the point that it escaped even the attention of people who were protesting the idea of difference.
Yeah.
There were efforts, though, in the Philippine Senate to remove the laws that have any kind of height discrimination. In 2015, they proposed to eliminate the laws requiring height requirements for the military, for security guards, and so on. But the president vetoed that bill, saying that we need stronger and taller people in the army. So we cannot approve that. So it is also interesting in itself. Yeah. So, but yes, it's a good point to mention the intersectionality between height and gender because that really plays a role. I have a small subset of people who identify as part of the LGBT community, and I have yet to write a paper about that because even within, for example, gay men, there's certain expectations depending on your height. Like who becomes the dominant partner and so on, somehow also shaped by height. That's something that I'm thinking of writing a paper about as well. Because that also speaks of how gender intersects with height.
I think again, Nestu, and then maybe the student. Maybe I think I mean because there's some student here. As you mentioned that in the Philippines that for the young people the height is matter, right? I mean like the supplement that you are talking. But interesting to see how I don't know about the among the young people in Indonesia is the height is also like what matter in the Philippines. But maybe has to first, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for the really inspiring lecture. Recently, I also engaged in this research about stunting, and it kept me thinking about the research that I've done, especially related to because you bring up the idea that it's important to see how specific focus on uh, hate in this context. Um, like in stunting case, for example, the way the government frame the features of something that they think as an ideal body. Also, somehow, well, really crafted to see the association, for example, between hate and the brain development. Because that's what exactly the message that are circulate in stunting prevention program to bring that the hate is actually matters. And you can actually, because hate is visible, then people can actually learn to evaluate their everydayness and their, reflecting on is it they have the ideal shape children or not, right? And yeah, and then how this idea is also somehow being discussed in the ground. For example, like our field in Manggarai, we talk about to think that if we have to be tall, how come we can be tall since our ancestor is Homo florensis? It's natural that we are short. But if you say that short is mean dumb, we have a president, PJ Habibie, who was short, but a PhD in I don't know. So that doesn't prove anything. So the discussions even about how the discussions about how the ideal type is actually being enforced.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, there's some kind of response to that. And yeah, it just make me think that how these negotiations between how the state power imposing some kind of ideal type, because they literally in the like a poster that we can find in the health post, for example, you can see how the cadre, the ibu in the village, they draw a poster using like brain development. Okay, they draw certain kind of, it looks like a brain and two different type of brain, and then they associate that the empty brain, it means burden for our country. Develop and tall, it means assets. And this type of discourse is now being circulated, and people talk about that and sometimes make the jokes. One day we somehow engage in the conversation, and some old ladies, so this one, this old ladies is hunting, and then they laugh about that, and then it's amazing to see actually how these kind of conversations about height and then how it associates with the with the not only but the quality of human is now being crafted, and I mean that's then the discussions that we have today is actually somehow enrich the detailed observations about how this particular biopolitics, you can maybe say, is in the process. Yeah, I'm just maybe reacting to that since somehow the research that I'm engaged in somehow really resonates with that discussion. Thank you very much.
And any from students? First one?
There's no question.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a minus of not question.
it happens a lot, more than a point.
I want to clarify because we have a better with the Philippines classes supplement because I in elementary school people encourage me to use that when I want because I feel like why should I because people tell me I'm sure in that age but I will accept that but maybe my friend always use that supplement and considered basketball because that they want to be an athlete and scholarship too. But I have a lot of my friends that have scholarship on basketball. And for me, for myself, I before I went to the school, but it's like intelligent school, but I cannot because I'm short and people love me because they want like more than my personal hate. So like it kind of makes me sad, but I feel proud that I live in Jakarta. Again, the young people have the relationship because they're on better research, but research that like work and they have for yeah, so yeah, many brand of milk and also supplement that like tablet, but type of brand milk that used to be make people, young people more like thing because I don't know if for them or not, but like uh, for age 20, you cannot you can go off the game because you're all it's kind of I don't know. I don't feel necessarily about hate yet. I don't mind at all about hate, but I think some of my friends is always talk about it because they want to be an athlete and they recruitment to the like school, especially like intelligence school that I want before, like cyber technology school, and they just hate for the that's all. Thank you. So thank you so much for your presentation and thank you, Masari, for the discussion. Actually, I'm kind of reflecting this presentation, my experience, because I remember that when I was a child, I was supposed to take sort of vitamins, supplements, and even I was required to get a lot of immunizations because I was so short compared to my place classmates. But I was kind of wondering how is the perception shifted about the hates when you are children and when you are adults? Because when I'm adult right now, and people see me then that because of my hate that people see me as oh you're a cute person because you're small because you're not tall. So are there any differences in seeing this heights um, in your childhood, in your adult? That's my question. And also, we have biological anthropologist. He's actually on Zoom, but right now he needs to leave. And he has questions for you. So yeah, he gave it to. Okay, so the first question from Rasiman is: are there any differences nature of Filipinos before and after Spain on U.S. colonialism? Because I think from your presentation you're like giving the flow graphic. So are there any differences? And then the second question is how does traditional Philippine culture perceive tallness? Like for example, between Luzon and Mindanao or among indigenous groups such as Akta and Manma.
Okay, yeah. And then after that, Sari also can respond to the discussion, right? Yeah.
Thank you for engaging with this topic, both with your own work and also your own experiences. I think it's really something that height being something we all have means that we're all potential ethnographic objects and subjects of this. This is not something that we're talking about a practice in some island somewhere, but we're actually all implicated and imbricated in this thinking. So to quickly answer the question of the biological anthropologists, actually there hasn't been a lot of change in the Philippines. And this is a reflection of maybe because there hasn't been a lot of progress in terms of nutrition. So height has remained fairly stable in the Philippines from Spanish times until today. Even though that kind of stability masks the inequality. Because there's always been people in the Philippines who were tall. Because height is they say it's 80% genetics and 20% nutrition. So it's unstable, it's unpredictable. Even if you are the child of two parents who are very tall, you can be short. There's no guarantee that genetics will lead to tall babies, tall children. And that element of uncertainty means that even in this very poor neighborhood, there can be tall basketball players. And this element of uncertainty also naturalizes height as something that you cannot say discrimination because height is a matter of chance, it's a matter of luck. And in a certain way, that's true, but only partially, which makes it really, really fascinating because you don't know, you cannot predict. In terms of local culture in the Philippines, yes, there's been, and that's my ongoing work as well, is to look at epics. These are from all the indigenous people. I was looking at epics and how people were described, how they describe the heroes in Philippine epic folklore. So I'm trying to discover words that are no longer used now, but were very used before. For example, there was a hero, and your friend mentioned Mamanwa, so I'm glad that your friend is really aware of our diversity of people in the Philippines. There's a Mindanao epic in which the hero, the epic hero, was described as he was so slim that you can put your fingers around his waist. And that's a hero in that epic, which suggests a kind of attention toward a certain body that's tall but also proportional. So it's not just tallness but proportionality that was sought after by people at the time. But we all don't know the full answer to that question because no one else is doing it, unfortunately. No one else is revisiting these texts with an attention towards the vertical. But that's something I hope to do. Something that I'm working on as well. Looking at old dictionaries to see what words were used for height in the pre-colonial and early colonial period. So that's a very important question. In terms of the difference between children and adults, definitely I would think that there are differences. Children are still in the process of growing, and this potentiality makes them an object of intervention until they're in their 20s. And if you're in college, if you're in high school, you don't know when your growth will stop. So people are still trying their best, drinking milk, uh, drinking supplements. Sometimes it's the children themselves who are looking for it. And as you mentioned, some people are not too concerned and they don't care about it. But some are. So it really depends. There's that variation. I wonder if gender also has to do with that. So in your experience, are the boys in your classmates who are boys, are they more concerned about height or not? In the Philippines, I found the boys are much more concerned about height than girls. There's definitely a gender component to it. Generationally, I don't know because the field work I was doing was among young people in the 2013, 2014. But now the Gen Z might think differently as well. So I have to go back to the field and see how the young people today are thinking about this as well. But the idea that height is a state project, definitely something that we need to think more about.
Yeah.
I think that those posters that you mentioned, I would like to see them. And I mean, these are ethnographic objects. And I find them to also be great conversation starters with people. I don't know, what do you think about this image that they're producing? So some of my historical work, I'm developing this notion of what I'm calling nationalist body projects. So I'm building on the sociological notion of body projects by Chris Schilling and other sociologists of the body. But they were looking at body projects as modernity projects by individuals who want to go to the gym, who want to look better and drink kombucha and to be healthy. But according to Chris Schilling, according to sociologists, these body projects are because in late modernity, the individual has emerged a side of identity that you can no longer identify based on your religion, based on your family, based on your work, but people are very individual in their identity. But I want to interpolate on that and push back a bit and say that no, the state remains someone who's trying their best to impose what I'm calling nationalist body projects. And historically, we see Japan. So in the Meiji Restoration, Japan lifted their ban on meat eating. And they argue that we need to compete against the West. Look at the soldiers of the West. We need to become taller. And that's one of the reasons why they embrace milk a lot. So all of these things you see in the malls, the Hokkaido milk and all of these milk products from Japan are also historically contingent. Japan only embraced milk as part of this bodily concern in the Meiji Restoration onwards, this desire to compete with the West. And China as well, where they have this expression fu or die, which means tall, rich, and handsome, something like that. Fu or die. So, but even the Communist Party and even the Nationalist Party, they saw height as they really work on public health as well, just like Sukarno, that we need to build the body. And it makes me wonder, in terms of Indonesia, the emergence of Indonesia as a middle power, the BRICS, these ambitions of global prominence. I wonder to what extent it parallels and tabulates with this desire to build the Indonesian body. So over the use of
Very interesting. Yeah. Thinking about this nationalist body project, definitely it got me into thinking about, the differences that the contemporary Indonesian state thinking about the body as a capital, as a mode of capital in this way, because like during Sukarno, a lot of literatures that, describing how he hesitant to accept, international funding money for family planning was necessarily because he thought at that time that the power of the Indonesian state was on the demography, on the much number of the people. So even though they're not thinking about like the nutrition in terms of tall verticality, but the body was conceptualized as this kind of it's okay, we have lots of people, maybe they're not tall like the European colonizers, but we have a lot. So it's kind of, counting the body in a literal sense was the one that Sukarno thought about in terms of this nationalist body project, I think, in that sense. But now it's slightly changed in the way that the current government or the current state right now think about the body nationalist project in the period where this kind of imaginaries about demographic bonus that was once rejected by Sukarno. And now because as in the Suharto eras, we accept this lots of funding for family planning programs. So we gotta, we had successful to reduce fertility numbers, and then we are now, towards demographic bonus, which reached peak in 2030s later. So this kind of momentary moment to take advantage of this, the particular time frame of human growth, which is the first 1,000 lives of birth, is like become even more politically loaded because and morally loaded as well. To sort of help the nations or to help the nations from to take advantage more of the demographic bonus that we have created like since the last intervention projects. So I think this kind of body nationalist body project is really like interesting to explore, definitely across, like you said, across national contexts. And it also think about the idea of this kind of epigenetics opportunities that sort of like interweaves with the economy when we think about human capital. So like the idea that economies now is actually infiltrated by the idea of taking advantage of this body, young body, early life development. So we have to invest more in children's, while for example, neglecting others, children's issues like why Indonesian state, care so much to this particular period of children's, while at the same time allowing them to neglect other health issues that affecting children's life as well. So this kind of, nationalist project is actually very political and very driven by the economic kind of rationalizations that Indonesians today think about, which is the demographic bonus opportunity or imagine opportunities. And also definitely like thinking about the vitamin supplements. I don't know, like among Indonesian mothers right now in my study, we have also come across this idea about formula milk and iron supplement and vitamin D supplements are, those kinds of, products that is widely circulated among young mothers to buy, to purchase in order to improve children's appetite. So they would eat more and then more nutrition to the body so they can correcting the height through this kind of things, vitamin D and irons. But I think this just also thinking back about, relates back to the Suharto periods where fortification was, political strategies to maintain economic opportunities for Suharto cronies because it allows flour productions, which is owned by Indonesian elites, Chinese elites in Indonesia. At that time, it was almost suffered from neoliberalizations, where Americans trying to control Indonesian exports to the global market. But then nationally, we got benefited because of the fortification as a useful strategies to intervene in Indonesia's public health issues at that time. So public health at the time allows this kind of Suharto cronies to as also at the same time to stay as a leading economic actors in that moment. So I think like today's discussion brings a lot about the national body project, body politics that is created through times. I didn't know so much about physical anthropology or biological anthropology studies in Indonesia. Like I think it's a call for biological anthropologists in the room to sort of maybe looking at the history of the field in Indonesia before in physical biology. I only heard that there was one biological anthropology, Pak Budi Hartono is a late biological anthropologist in Indonesia. I heard that he was actually involved in doing research about measuring head circumference, but I didn't actually learn what is it, like how is it turn out, what's the findings is about, and stuff like that. I think it's really interesting if we could actually also explore some of the work that we have been doing in Indonesia in terms of this physical and biological anthropology, especially because I think my involvement has this involvement with the idea of body, biological and health is really resonates with the point in the Philippines where professional anthropologists involved in the nationalist or colonialist project, right? In Indonesia, lots of Indonesian anthropologists also involved in consultation project, in development project. So in a way that my access to these issues actually facilitated through the works of facilitating development project, not now, but I think we need more and more, maybe doing some kind of archives or engaging with the previous anthropologists looking at Indonesian bodies or bodies politics previously.
I think there's Gitu? Okay, okay, okay. I want to give what's some people in the Zoom, but they already left, I think. Any response, comments, or
There is no one.
yeah, yeah. And Mas Aan dulu, hah?
Yeah, wait.
Mas Aan,
Mas Aan dulu.
Mas Aan, and terus Mas Ino. Ya, silakan.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, I probably missed that your presentation. I'm really sorry to translate. But can you maybe tell us about how the government addressed the issue of planting in the Philippines? And probably, if the messaging is also the same as Nabil already mentioned, is the issue of life on how they address that, or their long-term prevention. I think issue started now, but it's not only about height, and it's a lot more than that. So,
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. We do have a supplemental feeding program in schools. So that's one way that the government is trying to address stunting. There's also a conditional cash transfer program patterned after Brazil, patterned after South America. And one of the conditions for families to receive this monthly subsidy is also through compliance with public health outcomes, including anthropometric outcomes. So I would say that these are the two main areas in which the government is trying to intervene: the school feeding program and the conditional cash transfer. But it hasn't been that successful, obviously. And the pandemic actually stopped also the school program because they stopped school for 2 years. So that's something to think about. Actually, interestingly, they detected a slight increase in height during the pandemic in at least some areas. And they suspect that it's because maybe because the mothers were forced to stay with their kids. That they're not working.
Yeah,
They had more time with the kids.
and
maybe
they cook for the kids.
they cook. So that's something that hasn't been validated. But some of my friends in the nutrition agency are thinking that that might be one reason. So yeah, it's the whole subject of height is so diverse, so vast that you can look at the state, you can look at the national politics, you can look at the nutrition programs, you can look at the more phenomenological relationships between boys and girls, partners, how the partner preference. I didn't even talk about it, but some people, I also interviewed their dating preferences in terms of height. So you can be very, very phenomenological. And you can even look at history. You can look at ethics. So there's so many things to do. And I'm really excited to see what will come out of Indonesia in terms of if you explore the same things and what insights you'll get.
Imam?
Yeah, just a follow-up. I'm really interested with Sari's comments on your project on National Sporty Project, because just as Hestu already mentioned, that it's really related with the ideas of height, the idea of health among the children as a object of intervention for projecting some kind of human assets in the future. And when we think about this as a national spotted project, I'm also thinking about to go beyond the ideas of a good nation and a good strong nations, but how it will be related as well with the political economic structure exists today and also the projections in the future. So when Sari talks about 2045 about demographical bonus in Indonesia, we are not still thinking about what kind of labor they will. What is the labor that will absorb these new generations of populations, and as to mention before, hate is associated with brain, and this is really strong. There is a strong emphasis that we are increasing PISA score and also the intelligence of the future generations, but not in terms of
physicality. That's what I know, and I'm not sure whether policy said so.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, today when I reflect on your many illustrations among the Philippines, I'm also thinking about the role of the informal sector that is becoming the part of the large populations in Indonesia now that situate the ideas of the importance of hate. Because this is my reflection. I don't know whether this is only my observations, but when we see the informal sector, especially the waitress and also nanny and really large amount of labor, informal labor, it's usually short. And when we go to many restaurants and everything, we see the waiters. This is my observation. I don't know the statistic, but also the nanny. So there's an inequality in this economic structure between the formal and informal that I think will situate this target of state intervention in the future. Because if we still depend on this informal sector and we don't have anything in mind about what is 2045, what we will achieve, maybe we are still in dreams of becoming more educated and service-based labor in the future. So the idea and state interventions about how hate will be intervened will be different. So this is just my reflections. Maybe issues not just moral nationalist ideas about the strong body, but also related to political infrastructure may be situate, but I don't know whether it will be reflected consciously among the policymaker. But I think this is really a good starting point now. I think in our cluster as well, it's an important entry point to discuss this. But thanks Ari and Gideon. Just
Mbak yang di sana silakan.
Thank you for sharing your research. My name is Nita. So related to racial difference in Japan, I remember doing some research on free lunch project for students, and I remember reading something about that in the UK they used to have some free meal project for students because they want to achieve taller bodies for students, so they will have a stronger army for the mission. But my question is, do you think hate matters only for infants and young adults, and it becomes less irrelevant for the aging population? Because I think that as we get older, hate I don't know, the discussion is less and less. We talk more as we get older. We talk more about I don't know, muscle mass, bone mass, and we talk less about taste. And I don't know, maybe the discourse should I don't know, will shifting from hate to bone mass, and and because for the aging population and after listening to Sari, I think now I work in the government, and I think the Indonesian government, I don't know about Philippines, but Indonesian government put a strong focus only for the children and less on the aging population. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great observation, because I'm sure you remember these memes and images of how the humans from the infant becomes taller and then until they reach the adulthood, and then once you become very old, you start becoming shorter as well until you crawl like a baby again. So I have to admit that I myself have been focused on the younger as part, also mirroring the research attention that we had before that focused on young people, and also mirroring how states across the region are really very invested in young people, seeing this as an economic dividend that, oh, we have to focus on young people, they're the future of the nation. But what about the elderly? What about the aging population? No, that's a very important question. I don't know the answer, actually. I haven't interviewed too many of the older people in terms of height, but I can imagine that, especially now, as people try to live more functional lives way into their 60s, 70s, then it might be a place to look at that, the materiality of height among the aging population. I don't know, but I agree that it's such an important question to ask. And maybe one place to look at that is in countries where the demographic shift has already happened, like maybe Japan and the West. So, so and of course, Imam gave a lot of important reflection as well about how this is not just a matter of ideology, but also a matter of actual. This is real. This is actually reality. That these are actual people that we're talking about. These are informal workers whose very embodiment can be shaped by government policy and economic growth writ large. So there's also a structural layer to this. That on one hand we can talk about programs, we can talk about school feeding programs, but ultimately this is a matter of economic and social inclusion. This is a matter of quality of life. The single biggest factor that people have seen in terms of height is simply economic development. But somehow there's an attempt to short circuit that process by making the appearance of height the economic development instead of acknowledging that you actually need to build a nation. You need to uplift people for them to be tall. But the semblance is being sought after, which is very interesting. So in terms of theory, I'm showing this. This is a work in progress that I'm looking at Japan as a site for looking at this nationalist body project. So I am drawing on archival material, including diet manuals, school curricula, military records, division surveys, discursive materials, as possible sources to understand how height became a body project in Japan. So they wrote this: no strong army or rich nation without taller bodies. That was a slogan during the Meiji period. And it's so much of a draft, but I'm trying to divide the historicization according to this Meiji project of civilization and height in the early 20th century. And when Japan became very militaristic, how height was seen as a military value, that oh, we were gonna invade Southeast Asia, we need taller people. And then finally, height and modernity, height and prosperity. So in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, the Japanese celebrated that, oh, the height gap is closed, but endurance must now match our centimeters. So there's this idea that it's not enough to be tall, we need to be strong. But tallness was there. And there's a work in progress, but I feel that actually all the Asian countries can be looked in this way. So really excited about what's contemporarily what's happening now in Indonesia in terms of that project. Yeah, thank you everyone for the conversation. Very exciting.
Any comments?
Esther? Very quick,
Yes.
very quick comment on that. Like since we talked about inequalities, and since I also somehow had opportunity to do field work mostly in like consultations project, like from World Bank and everything. And I observe how, if you talk about how the body is actually being shaped, and I keep thinking about the implications of when we do that, it's always on the expense of other, the labor of doing it. Like in Indonesian case, for example, the ideals of, the thinking about how we shape the, national, the ideal body, it's actually on the expense of the cadres of mothers who mostly doing a very, there's no like a material gain you can get from participating in this project, but based morely on moral experience, the afterlife, not in this life. So like the normalizations of doing care works.
Yeah.
It's very visible in that sense. And also when we talk about inequalities, and we see how it's being very normal for the state somehow to interfere to the poor's body. mostly if you're poor, you get like interventions from the state, especially about how you use your body. I observe how the groups of mothers were the group is actually made in the context of cash transfer. They have to form a group, and then this group is basically a lab to train them to behave. I observe how they using a very cheerful song to wash their hands.
Yeah.
They need to be clean.
Yeah.
And then also, like I observe how during the measurements of children's weight, there's all officials from KB population control, and then using that moment to say that stunting is actually increased because you keep producing children, so you have to stop it. You use this IDU. What is the name? I always forget, but the idea of the poor as the source of problem. Like recently, we have these politicians like governor said that we need to promote vasectomy and use this practice as a not punishment, but if you want to get the state's subsidy, cash transfer, that would require you to do vasectomy.
Oh, wow.
So it's like
And
not
then
only
that's for the poor man, right?
for the poor
poor people.
yeah, for the poor. So if you want to get the help from the government, you need to cut it. I mean, basically, if you're poor,
Yeah.
you tend to experience like interventions towards your body.
Yeah.
And it's also something to think about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have productive discussion, and then I think that's I think the topics about the height is really important, and then maybe I will put in because I'm teaching the medical anthropology. Maybe next year or next semester I will have one session on this issue, and then the National Security Project also, there's another thing that we can develop actually, right? So we have to give a big applause to Gideon and Sari. Then I think we have a bit Imam. We ask Imam to give the souvenir as to Gideon, not to Sari. Ceremonial. Ceremonial. Ya. Ini fotonya siapa yang buat? Oh ini. Kita tolong Pak.
Thank you.
So maybe over here, so we can have the.
Yeah. So and then said Gideon also can give to the Department of Anthropology or something.
1, 2, 3, one more lagi. 1, 2. Oh, maybe.
Hah? Oh, mau ambil foto rame-rame?
Bebas aja.
Iya. Gimana caranya? Di sini aja. Oke. Yuk, ambil foto yuk.
Thank you for this.
Jadi dulu. Ayo foto dulu sebentar yuk.
Ayo.